He didn't brake slowly. He didn't pull over carefully. He opened the door at 40 miles per hour and shoved her out like something he'd accidentally picked up. Amara Rhodes hit the wet asphalt on her hands and knees. Her white dress soaked through in 3 seconds. The rain was cold. The street was empty. And Marcus didn't look in the rearview mirror once. He was already dialing someone else. Already laughing at something the other person said. She tried to stand. Her right knee buckled. She pressed her forehead to the ground for 1 second. Just one. Because she could not fall apart on a street whose name she didn't even know. Seoul. 1:47 a.m. Gangnam-gu. A street lined with buildings that cost more than small governments. She didn't know which building mattered. She didn't know that 3 floors above her, a penthouse light was still on. She didn't know that the man standing at that window had already gone very still. The kind of still that isn't calm. The kind of still that precedes something irreversible. Because men like Kang Hyun-Woo didn't witness things. They corrected them. The building had no name on the outside. That was intentional. Buildings with names invited curiosity. Buildings without names invited nothing at all. And that was precisely the point. Kang Hyun-Woo had owned this penthouse for 6 years. He came here when Seoul's other addresses felt too exposed, too surveilled, too full of people who were paid to watch him. Here, he watched the city, not the other way around. He had been standing at the floor-to-ceiling window for 40 minutes when the car stopped below. It stopped wrong. Not for a pickup. Not for a drop-off. Not for any of the dozen reasons a car stops on a Gangnam street at 2 a.m. It stopped the way a problem stops. Deliberately. In the dark. The passenger door opened. Something was pushed out. Not luggage. Not a bag. Not anything that should be pushed at all. A woman. She hit the ground and didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then she did. Slowly. Painfully. Arms shaking. White dress plastered to her body by rain that hadn't let up since midnight. The car didn't wait. It was gone before she had fully registered where she was. Hyun-Woo stood very still. He watched her try to stand. Her left arm wasn't cooperating. The angle of it said impact, not slip. Someone had forced this. The car door, probably at speed. The specific cruelty of a man who understood momentum. She made it to one knee. Her head dropped. Not defeat. Concentration. She was counting something. Steadying something internal. And that small detail, that quiet, private act of refusing to collapse, registered in Hyun-Woo with something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Recognition. He had been 12 years old when he first understood that the world had a particular logic for people who couldn't defend themselves. That it would take everything and call the taking natural. That survival was not given. It was extracted, daily, from people willing to fight for it when the world had decided they shouldn't. This woman was fighting. Alone, on wet asphalt. In a city she probably didn't fully know, with whatever had just been done to her still fresh in her body. And nobody stopped. 3 cars passed in 60 seconds. No one slowed. No window opened. No voice called out. The city simply continued, indifferent and enormous. The way cities always are when someone small is suffering in the dark. Hyun-Woo turned from the window. He picked up his phone, called the one number that answered on the first ring regardless of the hour. Street level, he said. Now? Carefully. He said nothing else. He didn't need to. Park Sung-jin, his head of security, had worked with him long enough to understand that when Hyun-Woo said carefully, he meant it the way surgeons mean it. With precision. With consequences if it went wrong. He walked to his desk, opened his laptop, pulled up the street-facing camera feed. He watched his team move into the rain like shadows. He watched them reach her. He watched her flinch when they touched her. That full-body recoil of someone who had learned that hands coming toward you usually meant harm. One of his men crouched, said something, held out his hand. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she took it. Hyun-Woo exhaled. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know her story. But he knew one thing with the cold certainty that had made him dangerous since he was 22 years old. Whoever had thrown her out of that car had made the last miscalculation of his comfortable life. The ceiling was the first thing she noticed. White. High. The kind of height that meant whoever owned this space wasn't thinking about square footage the way normal people thought about square footage. Amara lay still for a moment, just breathing. Her knee throbbed. Her left shoulder had a deep, grinding ache that she knew from the way it pulled would be worse tomorrow. Her palms were wrapped in something clean and white. Medical. Precise. This was not a hospital. The room was quiet in the way that money makes rooms quiet. Not silent. Curated. The hum of climate control. The distant murmur of a city through glass too thick to fully hear it. She sat up slowly. On the bedside table, a glass of water, a small white card, and 2 capsules in a paper cup. She read the card first. You are safe. Rest. Do not leave before morning. No full name. Just one letter. H. She stared at it for a long time. She didn't know an H in Seoul. She had been in this city for 7 months on a graphic design contract, brought over by a branding firm in Itaewon that had dissolved the partnership 3 weeks after she arrived, leaving her technically employed by a shell company and practically stranded. Marcus had promised it was an adventure. Marcus had promised a lot of things. She looked around the room with new eyes. The furniture was minimal and expensive in a way that didn't announce itself. Nothing had a visible brand. Everything had that quality of being exactly right. Not showy, not sparse, completely considered. She recognized one piece on the wall. A large canvas, abstract, deep blues and fractured gold. She had seen it in an auction catalog 2 years ago. It had sold for more than most people earned in a decade. Whoever H was, they had taste. And they had resources. And they had found her on a street at 2 o'clock in the morning and brought her here and left her a card that said she was safe, like they had the authority to guarantee it. She drank the water. She left the capsules. Not out of pride. Out of habit. She didn't take things she hadn't verified. She pulled back the sheet and stood carefully. Her legs held. Good. She walked to the window. Seoul stretched below her, still lit, still moving. The way cities this size never fully sleep. From this height, the street where Marcus had pushed her out was just a line between other lines. Unremarkable. Invisible. She pressed her forehead lightly against the glass. She had called Marcus 6 times from a stranger's phone in the elevator on the way up here. His line had rung once and cut to voicemail each time. By the 4th call, she had stopped expecting anything different. She wasn't crying. She had moved past crying about Marcus 18 months ago. What she felt now was something colder and more clarifying than grief. The feeling of a woman who had finally run out of reasons to wait for someone to become better than they were. She turned from the window. She picked up the card again. H. Who are you? She said quietly, to no one. Behind the door, in the hallway, someone stood motionless. Not to trap her, not to threaten her, because someone had given an order, and the order was, she doesn't face the morning alone. She met him at 6:43 in the morning. She had not planned it. She had been following the smell of coffee with the single-minded focus of a person who had survived a bad night and needed something to be normal. The kitchen was at the end of the hallway, past 3 closed doors, and one open to a room with walls of bookshelves so dense they looked structural. She almost turned back at the kitchen doorway. He was already there. Kang Hyun-Woo stood at the counter with his back to her, wearing a dark shirt, sleeves folded to the elbow. No jacket. No performance. He was reading something on a tablet propped against the backsplash, his coffee untouched beside him. He heard her. She knew because his shoulders shifted slightly. The way a person shifts when they've registered something new in their environment but decided to finish their thought before acknowledging it. He turned. She held the eye contact. She had trained herself to do that since childhood. His face was not what she had expected. She had built a version of him on the walk down the hall. Older. More visibly severe. The kind of face that belonged to rooms like this. He was none of that. Mid-30s. Composed in a way that read less like control and more like someone who had genuinely stopped needing to prove things. His eyes were dark and steady, and they looked at her the way she imagined he looked at everything. Carefully, but not unkindly. H, she said. Hyun-Woo, he said. Coffee. She blinked. Of all the things she had prepared to say to the man who had pulled her off a street in the middle of the night, she had not prepared for coffee to be the first word out of his mouth. Yes, she said. He made it without asking how she took it. He simply made it correctly. Black. No sugar. She noticed, but said nothing. She filed it. She sat at the counter. He remained standing. He slid the cup toward her. She wrapped both hands around it and looked at him over the rim. I'm not going to ask a lot of questions right now, she said. All right. Because I've learned that the answers people give you early are almost always incomplete. He said nothing, but something in his expression shifted by about 2 degrees in a direction she couldn't name. What I will ask, she said, is whether I'm here because you want something from me. The pause he gave her before answering was not evasive. It was honest, like a man deciding how much of the truth to hand over at once. No, he said. Then why? because no one else stopped. She looked at him. He looked back. And in that silence, between a woman who had stopped trusting rooms like this and a man who had stopped explaining himself years ago, something passed between them that neither of them would have described as comfort. But it was close. She drank her coffee. She did not say thank you. Not yet. He didn't ask her to. What you just watched is only the first layer of what this story is. What Hyun-Woo found in Amara's background file is the thing that changes everything. Subscribe right now, because Chapter 4 is where this stops being about one bad night on a street in Gangnam. By 10 a.m., he knew her name, her profession, her immigration history in Seoul, Marcus's full legal name, his current address, his registered vehicle, his phone carrier, and 3 of his most recently dialed contacts. He knew all of this because Park Sung-jin was very good at his job. Sung-jin delivered the report in the study, in the format Hyun-Woo preferred. Concise. Factual. No editorializing. Her name is Amara Rhodes, Sung-jin said. 29. Graphic designer. Came to Seoul on a contract with Dayan Branding. The contract collapsed. She's been freelancing since. No income recorded in the past 6 weeks. The husband, Hyun-Woo said. Not a question. Marcus Ellison. American. 41. He came here on an investor visa tied to a group called Shinwon Capital Partners. Hyun-Woo turned a page. Shinwon, he said quietly. Sung-jin recognized the pause. Yes. Shinwon is a front company. It's been used by 3 different organizations to move money through Korea's tech sector in the past 4 years. The current principal affiliation is a network that operates primarily out of Cebu and Macau. Hyun-Woo set the tablet down. The silence that followed was productive, not empty. Hyun-Woo's silence always meant he was building something in his head. Sung-jin had learned not to interrupt the architecture. He used my street, Hyun-Woo said. He didn't know it was yours. We pulled his GPS history. He drove through Gangnam at random. He stopped here because it was dark and there was no functioning camera on that particular block. There is now. Sung-jin said nothing. He launders for a network that operates in my city, Hyun-Woo said. He threw his wife out of a moving car outside my building. And he is currently, according to his phone records, having brunch in Cheongdam, completely unbothered. Yes. Hyun-Woo stood and walked to the window. Don't touch him yet. I want the temperature to drop first. Cancel his reservation at the Park Hyatt for this weekend. Have his primary contact at Shinwon go quiet. Small things. Accumulating. I want him to feel the ground shifting before he understands what is moving it. Sung-jin nodded. And the woman? Hyun-Woo didn't answer immediately. She's been financially isolated, he said. No income. Probably no clean access to her own accounts if they're shared. They are. Set up a secure account in her name. Transfer enough to give her options. She doesn't need to know where it came from yet. Sung-jin looked at him for 1 beat longer than the situation required. Hyun-Woo noticed. She is not a project, Hyun-Woo said quietly. She is a person who needs to not be trapped. There is a difference. Sung-jin accepted this, because in 10 years he had never seen Hyun-Woo make a move like this for any reason that wasn't strategic. And this didn't feel strategic. It felt like something Hyun-Woo himself hadn't named yet. He left the room. Hyun-Woo sat alone with the file open. Her professional photograph. She was looking directly into the camera. No smile. No apology. Just presence. The steady eyes of someone who had decided not to let the world reduce her. He closed the file. He opened it again 3 minutes later. By Thursday, Marcus had noticed. Not everything. Not the shape of it. But the texture. The way certain things that had always been easy had quietly become difficult. His dinner reservation at the restaurant he used for business meetings had been canceled. An error, they said. Apologies. No available dates for 2 weeks. His associate at Shinwon, a man named Paul who always returned messages within the hour, had gone quiet for 48 hours and then replied with 2 lines that said nothing and promised everything. His membership card at the golf club had been declined at the front desk. Processing issue, they said. Should resolve soon. It had not resolved. And he had been standing there with 2 investors. None of it made sense individually. Together it was beginning to make a shape. He called Amara. He had waited 3 days to call. Deliberate. He had wanted her to feel the silence first. To understand, through absence, what her options actually were. He expected a voicemail. He expected a woman who had nowhere to go and no one to call and would eventually surface, frightened and compliant. ready for whatever version of reconciliation he chose to offer. The number gave him a recording that said the line was unavailable. He tried again. Same. He sat in his car outside his hotel and stared at his phone, and for the first time in this entire situation allowed himself to feel something adjacent to unease. She would have gone to the embassy, probably, or a hospital, some public resource that would record her injuries and generate documentation. He could manage documentation. He had managed things like that before. He had managed much harder things. But a disconnected line meant someone else was involved. Someone who had replaced her access before she could be reached. He called a contact. A man who moved in Seoul's particular ecosystem of open secrets and closed rooms. The contact picked up. I need to know if there's any movement around my name, Marcus said. From anyone local. Anything at all. I can look, the contact said. The voice was measured. Too measured. Do it fast. He hung up. He looked at the hotel entrance. The doorman who had always greeted him by name looked past him this evening. Small thing. Possibly nothing. He went inside. He did not sleep well. Meanwhile, in a building across Gangnam whose name appeared on no public record, Kang Hyun-Woo sat with a second file that Sung-Jin had placed on the desk that evening with the careful deliberateness of a man delivering something he wasn't sure would be received well. Hyun-Woo read it once. Then he read it again. He set it face down on the desk. He said nothing for 4 full minutes. The file contained one piece of information that changed the architecture of this entire situation. One name that connected Amara Rhodes to a world she had never been told existed. A world that had been quietly protecting her from a distance since before she understood what protection meant. Hyun-Woo finally spoke. Does she know? He said. No indication of it, Sung-Jin said. Who else has access to this information? At the moment? Sung-Jin said carefully. Only us. And them. Hyun-Woo looked at the ceiling. If you think you know where this story is going, you are wrong. What is in that file doesn't just change the story. It changes what Kang Hyun-Woo is willing to risk. Subscribe now. Chapter 6 is where everything breaks open and nothing goes back to what it was. Her grandfather's name was Raymond Beaumont. Not a name that appeared in newspapers. Not a name that appeared in court records or financial filings or any of the public documents that tell the story of visible power. Raymond had spent 40 years making certain of that. What he had appeared in were the private ledgers of 4 governments. The closed-door negotiations of 2 maritime disputes. The handshake agreements that had shaped the movement of certain commodities through the Pacific Rim in ways that are still operational today, run now by men who had learned at his side and would never speak his name in rooms with windows. He had died 18 months ago, quietly, at home in Atlanta, at 77 years old. He had spent the last decade of his life doing 2 things, making his network legitimate and keeping his granddaughter clean. Amara had known him as a man who sent her books on her birthday, called on Sunday evenings, and asked about her work with genuine, focused attention she had always thought was simply his personality. She had not known that the calling was also monitoring, that the attention was also protection, that every city she moved to, Raymond had made a call before she arrived. Hyun-Woo read the file with the focus of a man recalibrating in real time. He understood what it meant immediately. Raymond's remaining network, the trusted remainder that had not dispersed but absorbed itself into legitimate channels, still operated by one central rule. No one touches Raymond's people. Not for any reason. Not for any price. Amara was Raymond's only grandchild. She was Raymond's only blood. If Marcus Ellison's associates, the Macau network behind Shinwon, had ordered what happened on that street, they had either not known who she was or decided it didn't matter. Either option was catastrophic for them. Raymond's people would have been notified by now. They monitored her movement passively. They always had. What they didn't know yet was that she was here. With him. Hyun-Woo made a call. A number he hadn't dialed in over 2 years. American area code. The man who answered had a voice like old wood. Dense and dry and unmovable. I know why you're calling, the man said. She's safe, Hyun-Woo said. She's here. The husband. Being handled. The silence that followed was the kind that contains entire histories in it. Raymond used to mention you, the man said. He said you move the way water moves. You don't force anything. You find the pressure points and you wait. Hyun-Woo said nothing. She doesn't know, the man continued. About any of it. Raymond was insistent about that. I know. You going to tell her? Not tonight, Hyun-Woo said. She has enough to hold. A pause. Then, with the weight of someone who had been watching over someone else's child for years and was finally, cautiously, releasing that watch into another set of hands. Keep her safe, Hyun-Woo. The line went dead. He sat with the phone for a moment. He had understood, the instant he made that call, that he was no longer a bystander who had stepped in out of principle. He was a principal now. He had walked into a situation with a history that ran deeper than this city, deeper than this night, and declared himself responsible for its resolution. He had done it anyway. What he hadn't done was examine why that felt less like strategy and more like something he didn't have a clean word for. She found the envelope on Friday morning. It was on the counter beside her coffee cup. Plain white. Her name written on the front. Not Mrs. Ellison. Not her married name. Her actual name. The one she had been using for herself in her own head for 2 years before she admitted it out loud. Amara Rhodes. She opened it. Inside was a card from a private banking institution and a folded note with a pin and a single line. Your options should belong to you. She sat with that for a long time. She was not a woman who accepted things without understanding them. She had learned, at some cost, that gifts with unclear origins usually came with unclear obligations. She had also learned, at greater cost, that refusing help out of pride while drowning was its own kind of self-destruction. She picked up the card. She put it in her pocket. She went looking for Hyun-Woo. She found him in the study, on the phone, voice low. He saw her in the doorway, held up one finger. She waited. When he ended the call, he looked at her. She held up the card. This is yours, she said. It's yours now, he said. I don't know what that means. It means you can leave here and not be forced back somewhere you shouldn't go. It means you have time to decide what you want to do next without the decision being made by financial pressure. She looked at him carefully. I don't accept things I can't repay, she said. This isn't a debt structure, he said. Think of it differently. How? He paused. And the pause was real, not performed. A man choosing the right words because the wrong ones would make this smaller than it was. Think of it as a correction, he said. Someone removed your options. I'm returning them. That's all. She was quiet. She wanted to argue. She had built her entire adult identity around not needing anyone to correct things on her behalf. She had stayed with Marcus for 3 years partly because the alternative was admitting a catastrophic mistake, and partly because she had nowhere clean to land. She was standing in a clean place right now, and the man who had made it clean was looking at her without asking for anything, without performing generosity, without even seeming to require her gratitude to feel justified. That was the part she couldn't locate. What are you getting from this? She said. The outcome I prefer, he said simply, which is that the man who drove away while you bled on a street, he had no right to be on faces appropriate consequences. His eyes were steady, and that you're not made collateral to that process. You're separate from it. She had not expected that sentence either. She put the card back in her pocket. She said, tell me about Marcus. What you actually know. And Hyun-Woo, who had been waiting for precisely this question, sat down and told her the truth. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough to permanently change everything she thought she understood about the marriage she'd survived. Marcus had the call returned on Saturday afternoon. His information contact. The man who dealt in Seoul's ecosystem of closed doors and open secrets. He called back and his voice had a texture Marcus hadn't heard from him before. Careful. Measured. The particular tone of someone who has found something they weren't entirely sure they should have found. There's a name, the contact said. Give it to me. A pause. Kang Hyun-Woo. Marcus didn't recognize it immediately. Then he did. Not from a personal meeting. Not from an introduction. From a conversation 18 months ago at a private dinner in Gangnam, where a man who managed money for serious people had leaned in and said, quietly, that there was one Korean operator who did not take meetings, did not take interference, and that the single wisest thing any foreign investor could do in this city was pretend that name was not in their vocabulary. His hand tightened on the phone. You're sure, he said. His building. His street. His people who moved her. Marcus stood from the table where he'd been sitting, walked to the window of his hotel room. She's with him, he said. She's in his building. Something shifted in his chest. Something he would not call fear, but that occupied the same address as fear. She doesn't know anyone in Seoul, he said, mostly to himself. She knows him now, the contact said. And then, very quietly, with the careful delivery of someone releasing information they believe the recipient might not survive cleanly. He's been asking questions, Marcus. Not about her. About you. About Shinwon. About your access and the names you carry. Marcus said nothing. He knows what you're connected to. The contact said. Marcus ended the call. He stood at the window. He had a specific talent. He had always had it. The talent of managing threat by reframing it. Turning danger into leverage. Finding the angle where he remained in control of the narrative. It had served him well for 41 years. It had let him sleep soundly in situations that would have dismantled other men. He reached for it now. He found nothing. Because what he was beginning to understand, standing at a window in a hotel room, was that the thing he had done on a dark street 4 days ago had not been a private act between a man and his wife. It had been committed inside the radius of something enormous. Something with reach and patience and absolutely no requirement to announce itself before it moved. He picked up his phone. He called a number at Shinwon. Not Paul. Higher than Paul. A man who answered only when the situation justified it. I have a problem, Marcus said. The man on the other end was silent for a long moment. Then, we know. Marcus blinked. What? We've been aware since Tuesday, the man said flatly. You were not supposed to be in Gangnam that night. We've been managing the exposure since you created it. And now we have a separate concern. A pause that had weight in it. The woman. Where exactly is she? Marcus felt the floor move. She's with Kang Hyun-Woo, he said. The silence that followed was the loudest silence of his life. Hyun-Woo found out about the Shinwon call on Sunday morning. Sung-Jin delivered it sitting down, which meant it was serious. Sung-Jin only sat when the information required it. They've been aware since Tuesday, Sung-Jin said. They allowed Marcus to continue operating without interference because removing him would have raised questions they weren't ready to answer. But now they know she's here. Hyun-Woo looked at the ceiling. They're sending someone. Already in Seoul. Arrived last night. This is not a low-level presence. Who? Sung-Jin told him. Hyun-Woo absorbed the name. He stood, walked to the window. Outside, Seoul was mid-morning bright, sunlight on glass towers, the city looking entirely like itself and nothing like what it actually was. They want her as leverage, Hyun-Woo said. They want to know what she's told you. They want to assess whether she's a liability to the Shinwon structure. She has no structural connection to any of it. She's clean. But they don't know that yet. She's not a liability, Hyun-Woo said. She's a priority. Sung-Jin said nothing. Tighten the building. Full rotation on her floor. I want to know the moment anyone in Seoul receives a communication with her name in it. Personal or professional. Understood. And I need to tell her, Hyun-Woo said. Sung-Jin looked at him. I cannot protect her from something she doesn't know is coming, Hyun-Woo said. She needs the full picture. He walked to the kitchen. She was already there. She had started doing this over the past 3 days. Arriving early, leaving coffee ready for both of them. He had noticed this and said nothing about it, which was its own kind of conversation. She looked up when he came in. She read his face. Not perfectly, not yet, but she was learning its language. She saw that something had changed. What happened, she said. He sat down across from her. I need to tell you something about your grandfather, he said. She went very still. He passed away 1.5 years ago, she said carefully. He was a retired businessman. He was. Raymond Beaumont, Hyun-Woo said, was one of the most significant backroom operators in Pacific Rim finance and influence from 1975 through 2010. He worked across governments and organizations in the space that legitimate power creates and then pretends doesn't exist. He was precise, careful, and never once caught. He spent his last decade making his work legitimate and making his family protected. She didn't move. He made calls every time you moved to a new city, Hyun-Woo continued. He made sure that people in each of those cities knew who you were, understood that you were untouchable. Her hands were flat on the table. You were always protected, Hyun-Woo said. You just couldn't see the walls. The silence in the room was enormous. That's not, she started. I know it isn't what you were told, he said. She looked at him. Does Marcus know? She said. Her voice was controlled. Barely. I don't believe he knew initially, Hyun-Woo said. But the network he launders for has known for some time. And I believe that's why. He stopped. She finished it herself. That's why he did it, she said. Not a question. They told him to. Her voice had gone completely flat. It's what the evidence suggests, Hyun-Woo said quietly. She looked at her hands. She looked at the window. She looked somewhere that was not this room at all. And then, for the first time since the night on the wet street, Amara Rhodes let herself feel the full weight of what had been done to her. Not by a cruel man who didn't love her. By a calculated man who had been instructed to remove her from the board entirely. She didn't cry. He had braced for it. For the fracture that follows a revelation at this scale. He would not have faulted her. He would not have been uncomfortable with it. She didn't cry. She sat with it for about 4 minutes. He waited. Then she looked at him. "What do you need from me?" she said. He stared at her. "To end this," she said. "Your way? Properly. What information do I have that you need?" He had genuinely not expected that. He had expected fear. He had expected grief. He had expected, at minimum, the paralysis that most people experience when the story they've been told about their own life is replaced without warning by a different, darker, truer story. She was asking him to use her as an asset. "You're not in that position," he said. "I am the granddaughter of a man who apparently moved the world in ways nobody could see for 40 years, she said. "And I spent 3 years married to the man they sent to neutralize that legacy through me." Her eyes were steady and unblinking. "I'm already in every position. I'd rather be in it usefully." Hyun-Woo looked at her for a long time. Something shifted in the architecture of him. Not strategy, not calculation. Something beneath both of those things. Something he hadn't consulted in years. "There's a meeting," he said. "The Shinwon contact who arrived yesterday wants to confirm you're not a problem. They'll approach through Marcus, probably offer him a clean exit if he delivers proof of your situation." "Let them," she said. "Amara. Let them think Marcus is cooperating. Let them think I'm scared and uninformed and manageable." She held his gaze without flinching. "And then show them I'm not." He was quiet for a long moment. "Is that something you can work with?" she said. He almost smiled. He didn't. But she saw it almost happen, and something shifted between them in that almost. "Yes," he said. They sat together in the particular silence of two people who have crossed into something that is not quite collaboration and not quite anything else they have a word for yet. "My grandfather," she said finally. "Was he a good man?" Hyun-Woo considered the question with the full seriousness it deserved. "He built things that hurt people," he said, "and then spent the last decade of his life building things that didn't. Which one is the real measure? I honestly don't know. But he protected you for his entire life. That part was real." She nodded slowly. She looked at her coffee cup. "Okay," she said. 2 letters. Barely a word. But they carried the full weight of a woman choosing, consciously and without reservation, to step out of the story that had been written for her. By that afternoon, the plan was in motion. By evening, Marcus had received a call he believed was from his Shinwon handler arranging a meeting. He didn't know the call had been routed through Hyun-Woo's network. He didn't know that the woman he believed was frightened and isolated was in the next room, listening to every single word. He didn't know that Raymond Beaumont's people had been contacted and were already moving. He had one more call to make before he walked into the room that would end his comfortable life. He almost didn't make it. He made it anyway. And when he did, the voice on the other end was not who he expected. Some men move through the world believing it belongs to them. They take what they want. They discard what inconveniences them. They drive away from damage and call it someone else's problem. They do this over and over, city after city, year after year, because nothing has ever arrived to tell them that the world has been keeping a careful record of every single choice. Marcus Ellison had driven away from a woman bleeding in the rain. He had made one call, then another, then a dozen more. He had spent a week feeling the ground shift beneath him and telling himself it was manageable. It was not manageable. It had never been manageable. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to become visible. Kang Hyun-Woo did not believe in vengeance. He believed in correction. Vengeance was emotional. Correction was systemic. It closed doors. It restructured access. It ensured that the man who had thrown a woman out of a moving car and returned to his hotel without a single moment of reflection would discover, over the coming weeks, that he no longer had a hotel, or a network, or a single contact willing to answer the phone. Amara Rhodes stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of a penthouse she had not been born to, and looked out at the city that had almost swallowed her whole. She was not the same woman who had pressed her forehead to wet asphalt 3 weeks ago. She was something harder than that now, something her grandfather would have recognized on sight. She picked up her coffee. Behind her, Hyun-Woo said, "It's done." She didn't turn around. "Not yet," she said. She was already thinking about what came next. So was he. And neither of them knew that what came next was the part that could not be taken back. Not by either of them. Not by anyone. Drop a comment below. Did you see Marcus's ending coming? And if you want to know what Hyun-Woo does when he finally realizes that protecting Amara has become something he cannot afford to stop, subscribe now. This story is only beginning.